A single shot starts a cop on the quest of a lifetime.
What propelled us on, in spite of the dangers, possibly the greatest discovery in the world awaits you.
On his team, the 8th man to walk on the moon. And one of the richest stock traders on Earth. Together, they set out to solve the greatest mystery in the Bible. The miracle of the parting of the Red Sea.
The crossing of the sea is the culmination of the Exodus story.
It is meant to be awe-inspiring. It is God doing something only the Creator, who made the waters, who made the wind, could do.
For many today, the story is no more than a myth.
The Egyptian evidence for the presence of the Israelites in Egypt is precisely zero.
Trying to find the place where the Red Sea was crossed, it's an exercise in futility.
Could the Bible really be true? Two very different investigators hope to prove that God did part the waters. One is a software engineer who believes that science supports the miracle.
I have shown that the account of the parting of the Red Sea in Exodus 14 is a historical event.
The other is a hardened cop looking for forensic clues on the ground.
God's fingerprints are left on this planet, and if we look close enough and hard enough, we will find the evidence.
California, 1978. Plainclothes cop Bob Cornuke is a crime scene investigator. He has no interest in the Bible, but that is about to change.
I heard the radio say that there was a truck on fire in somebody's front yard, and I was just right around the corner. Now, usually a uniformed guy will take that, but I said I'd handle it.
Cornuke pulls up in front of the house.
I get out of my unmarked car in plain clothes, sports jacket, had a 9mm underneath my jacket, walk up to the front door of the house.
Quickly, he realizes it's a trap.
I see a man, and he's pointing a rifle right between my eyes. He has a half-drunk bottle of vodka in his other hand, and he says to me, "Are you a cop?" And I said, "No."
Cornuke runs for cover. The gunman opens fire.
And I heard the cracks of the bullets just zip past my ear. I radioed in that there was a shooting. I'm pinned down for about 3 hours.
Finally, the man comes out, shooting. Cornuke responds in kind.
My shotgun was all sweaty holding it. I just threw myself over the hood of the police vehicle, pulled the trigger. The shotgun just exploded in my hands. A big ball of fire came out.
The man goes down, fatally wounded in the chest. Bob survives, but he'll never be the same again.
You're holding a shotgun, and then the smoke is still coming from it, and he's laying there and he's dying. It was really tore my heart open at that time. It's hard to explain, but it was really tough to go through.
This fateful encounter sets Cornuke on a course that will change his life. After a decade of service, Bob leaves the police force. He moves to Colorado, seeking some peace and quiet.
I felt my whole spirit was receiving this quenching break. I didn't realize that the greatest adventure was just around the corner.
Soon, Cornuke will be walking in the footsteps of Moses, investigating the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea. The man who inspires this new quest is an American hero, astronaut Jim Irwin. Jim Irwin is the lunar module pilot on NASA's historic Apollo 15 mission. For Jim, the mission is, above all, a spiritual experience. On July 31st, 1971, he steps out onto the lunar surface. Irwin spends almost 3 days on the moon.
He told me, he said, Bob, he says, I turned and looked at the earth. I raised my visor, and he said, all I had was the beat of my heart and the hissing of the oxygen in my helmet. So he's looking at the earth, and it's a living, breathing orb. It's blue and white and green and brown. And he said you could see the water sparkling on it. And he goes, he knew at that moment it wasn't a cosmic accident. God's hand actually crafted the earth. Now, he was a religious guy, but going to the moon made his faith just really explode.
When Irwin returns to Earth, he has a new mission: to prove that the Bible is literally true. A decade later, he asks Kornuk to help him.
We sort of intersected at that moment in our two lives. He was looking for lost locations in the Bible. I was looking for adventure. We formed a partnership, and off we went.
Now, Bob will apply his forensic skills to investigate the most mysterious cold case on the planet: the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea.
The parting of the Red Sea might be the most spectacular miracle in the Old Testament.
The crossing of the sea is the culmination of the Exodus story.
The Bible records that the Israelites spent years enslaved in Egypt. One day, God speaks to Moses from a burning bush, commanding Moses to rescue his people. Moses asks the Pharaoh to release the Israelites, but Pharaoh refuses. God then sends 10 plagues on Egypt. Eventually, Pharaoh allows the Israelites to leave. Moses leads them out of Egypt on a journey known as the Exodus. Days later, Pharaoh sends his chariot army to chase them down.
Pharaoh's changed his mind, and the Egyptians by now are chasing after them. A few days after the Israelites leave Egypt, they come to a sea which they can't get past.
We have the people of Israel stuck between Pharaoh's massive army and this body of water.
Moses speaks to God, and God tells him to move forward.
Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea.
The waters of the sea are parted. According to the book of Isaiah, God even builds a roadway across the water. The Israelites cross over on dry ground.
When the waters come down, they literally come crashing down on Pharaoh's army, and they destroy the army.
It's a powerful story. But when Bob checks out the archaeology, he discovers there is little or no evidence for it.
There is no proof. There is no archaeological evidence for the Israelites at any stage in their journey. They have not been detected. Archaeologists don't bother with this. We have better things to do with our time. You try and locate the places that the Bible talks about. Oh, is it this? Is it that? Who cares? You're not going to find it. As it is an exercise in futility.
Kornuk and Irwin disagree. They believe that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Archaeology is overrated. It's the study of durable rubbish. Now, as I study the Bible, it's an old crime scene. It's 2,000 years old, 3,000 years old, and evidence erodes very quickly. Time is the enemy of every investigator. Time is brutal to an investigation.
The friends agree to use the Bible as a guide and look for any remaining evidence on the ground in Egypt. In 1988, Bob Kornuk and Jim Irwin set off on their mission to discover the location of the parting of the Red Sea. Joining them is multimillionaire Larry Williams. He's looking for adventure and generously offers to fund the trip.
Larry is one of the neatest guys you ever want to meet in the world. He has a lot of courage, a lot of smarts, one of the wealthiest guys around.
Their quest is to prove the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea. To do that, they need to pinpoint the exact location where it happened. The Red Sea stretches all the way from the Gulf of Aden in the south to the Gulfs of Suez and Aqaba in the north. In theory, the Israelites could have crossed almost anywhere. Fortunately, the Bible provides some clues.
Exodus is very specific on all the places they went to as they left Egypt. They start off living in Goshen, they gather together in Sukkot, and it mentions a series of places until they get to the sea.
In fact, the Bible names a dozen locations on the route of the Exodus. That's more clues than a cop could ever hope for. But there is a problem. The place names don't match the names of any modern locations.
One would think, since the biblical narrative is so specific as to where the Israelites went and which cities they passed through, that one could find the route of the Exodus quite easily. In fact, one can't. It's been next to impossible to figure out which way they went.
Kornuk and his team refuse to abandon their quest. The start and end points of the Exodus seem to be identifiable. Maybe they will provide a clue. The Exodus text records that the Israelites in Egypt lived in a lush and fertile land called Goshen.
From what the Bible says about Goshen, it implies it's somewhere in the eastern Nile Delta.
Where the Israelites cross the Red Sea depends on which direction they go after leaving Goshen. It all depends where the end of the Exodus, Mount Sinai, is located.
Well, in the narrative of the Bible, we know they had a starting point, Goshen. They had a finishing point, which is a mountain known as Sinai. And in between is a huge event where the Red Sea parted and they went through the ocean.
Today, Mount Sinai is thought to be at the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. It's also known as Jebel Musa, or the Mountain of Moses. At Mount Sinai, the Israelites build an altar and 12 pillars of stone. At Mount Sinai, they live for many weeks.
Mount Sinai is the place that Moses first encounters God in the burning bush. It's the mountain to which the people return, where the Ten Commandments and Torah is given through Moses to the people.
If Goshen is in the eastern Nile Delta, and Mount Sinai is at the southern tip of the desert, then the Israelites must have crossed the Red Sea somewhere along the Gulf of Suez. So far, no one has found any trace of a roadway through the sea. and no remains of a single chariot on the seabed. Kornuk begins to wonder if the received wisdom may be wrong.
We went to the traditional site of Mount Sinai, and we decided to start from there.
Kornuk and his team climbed the peak, searching for some clue to where the parting of the Red Sea took place.
It was crystal clear. The sun came up, it was dazzlingly beautiful. And I couldn't believe it when Jim looked at me with this look of surprise on his face. He said, "Bob, nothing about this fits. This is not Mount Sinai."
The team finds no trace of an altar with 12 pillars, nor an oasis to support thousands of Israelites with enough food and water for weeks.
This is Archaeology 101. This is not the mountain. There's not one scrap of evidence to support this is the mountain, and we need to look somewhere else.
Kornuk learns that Jebel Musa was only nominated as Mount Sinai when a monastery was built there in the 4th century AD. That's more than 1,500 years after the Exodus.
The traditional location of Mount Sinai in the Sinai today may not be the proper place. Bear in mind that a lot of these sites were identified much later.
If the real Mount Sinai is somewhere else, the crossing site is somewhere else too. Kornuk and his team turn again to the Bible for clues. The Exodus text is clear that the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea happens because the Israelites are trapped. They are said to be bewildered by the land, closed in by the wilderness. They are stuck between Pharaoh's army and the sea. The team examines satellite pictures of the Sinai Peninsula. They look for any features that might explain why the Israelites could not escape Pharaoh's army.
So, as a police investigator, you have to have an open mind and look at the evidence and let the evidence speak for itself instead of us speaking for the evidence.
At the very tip of the peninsula, they spot something promising. A narrow stretch of coastline surrounded by mountains.
Mountains hemming them in, we have that in the satellite imagery. The water in front of them is the deep sea. That's a feature that we have in the satellite imagery.
The team drive to the tip of the peninsula to check for themselves. They discover a location known as the Straits of Tiran. Here, the Israelites would find themselves trapped between the mountains, the sea, and the Egyptian chariots.
A large amount of people would have had an easy way of it just to walking down this area. The Bible says they went all the way to the end, turned back right here, right in this area here, and you can see this wide beach area here. That's where they were stuck. The wilderness had hemmed them in. The water had hemmed them in. Pharaoh coming upon them had hemmed them in. They had nowhere to go.
The landscape seems to fit the biblical description, but the sea does not. The Gulf of Aqaba plunges sharply down into the depths. The sheer sides are too steep for the Israelites to get down to the seabed and walk across. Kornuk and Williams don scuba gear. The Bible says God created a roadway through the sea. If this is the right place, the roadway should be here.
You dive down and you start looking in the Gulf of Aqaba there, and it's just full of life. And it's just a beautiful place, beautiful.
Here, beneath the surface, Kornuk discovers something extraordinary. A gigantic coral reef.
We could see this wall of this reef, and it was straight up and down. This reef was right below the water, but yet it descends down like a couple thousand feet into the depths of the ocean there.
It's a revelation for Bob Cornuke.
Isaiah 51, God says, I'm going to build a roadway through the sea that they're going to go upon. And we have this underwater reef. It's not above water. It's just below the surface of the water. And this reef goes from the tip of the Sinai Peninsula to Arabia.
Cornuke and Williams searched the reef for any surviving remains of Pharaoh's chariot army. They find only modern shipwrecks. Nevertheless, Bob feels confident that the parting of the Red Sea took place here and not in the Gulf of Suez.
It's pretty exciting to think that this is the exact pedestal of land that's talked about in Isaiah, and that this is where the Red Sea parted and the children of Israel went through on dry ground.
As a cop, Cornuke wants to find corroborating evidence. He can't find any on the reef, but maybe he can on the other side of the Gulf. Jim Irwin suggests a challenging endeavor.
I was with Larry Williams and Jim Irwin, the astronaut. Then Jim looks at me and says, you and Larry need to go over there. But this is more dangerous than going to the moon.
Across the Gulf is the forbidden wilderness of Saudi Arabia. In 1988, the oil-rich kingdom does not welcome tourists. But Cornuke and Williams will not be stopped.
What we did was absolutely off the chart dangerous, but we did it and we got in. But what we found over there is to me, mind-blowing.
While Jim Irwin and Bob Cornuke explore Egypt, in Colorado, a different kind of detective is also seeking evidence of the parting of the Red Sea. Software engineer Carl Drews. Now a systems designer at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, Drews is also a Christian. His quest begins in a graduate class on fluid dynamics. He is learning about how wind blowing over water moves the water. When wind raises water levels, it is known as storm surge. When it lowers them, it is known as wind set-down.
I wasn't thinking of the Red Sea at all, but the professor was talking about a phenomenon where the wind blows in, let's say, this direction, and what happens is the sea moves at a 45-degree angle. So you have the wind pushing this way and the sea moves this way. I said, that sounds like something I heard and read in Exodus 14.
The Bible records that God drives the Red Sea back with a strong east wind, which blows all night. Drews begins to daydream. He imagines how wind set-down might explain the parting of the Red Sea. Excited, he goes to a colleague to explain his discovery.
I proudly said, I figured out the mystery of the parting of the Red Sea. And I showed how an east wind would blow here, and then the Gulf of Suez would move out of the way, and I was very smug. And I said, Jason, what do you think of that? He looked at my diagram and said, generally, an east wind blows that way.
It's a rookie mistake.
My wind was blowing in the wrong direction.
Wind set-down is not the answer, at least not on the Gulf of Suez. Drews does not give up, though. He believes in his theory. He decides to make the parting of the Red Sea the subject of his graduate computing thesis. His first task is to find a body of water where wind set-down would work. Like Kornuk before him, he turns to the Bible for clues about where to look. He discovers that in the original Hebrew, the Israelites cross at Yam Suf. Yam Suf is usually translated as Red Sea, but in fact, it means Reed Sea. It's a puzzle for Drews. Reeds usually grow in brackish water, not in the ocean. A thick sea with reeds in it is more likely to be a large lake.
It didn't seem to make any sense until I looked closely at the Eastern Nile Delta.
Drews studies detailed maps of the area. Close to the land of Goshen, where the Israelites live in Egypt, he discovers a large lake. It's large enough to be considered a sea. Lake Manzala.
Lake Manzala to this day is this huge body of water, shimmering body of water with lots of reeds in it stretching over the horizon. So if there's any place in the Egypt frontier now that matches the description of a sea of reeds, Lake Manzala is it.
Lake Manzala seems to fit the biblical description. Could wind set down here create a dry roadway through the waters? Drews will have to construct a complex computer model of the area, inputting precise data about the lake and connecting rivers at the time of Exodus. He quickly runs into a problem.
I tried to figure out what exactly did the Eastern Nile Delta look like at that time. And this is one of these problems where nobody knows.
It's been 3,000 years since the Israelites left Egypt. The rivers and lakes in the Eastern Nile Delta have changed radically in that time.
What has happened there in the 1860s was the Suez Canal was built along straight through the side of the Lake Manzala there. So that messed up everything. So you have to figure out what did it look like before that period.
Drews discovers a source that may contain the answers. Greek historian Herodotus writes about his travels in the region in the 5th century BC. His experiences are reproduced in The Geography of Herodotus by an early 19th century scholar. Drews goes to the university library, hoping to find a copy.
I went down into the stacks, down the deepest part of the library, which is the place I like best, and found his book. And I was thinking, what would I find here? And this is an old book, so it's kind of a little bit crinkly. And I'd been thinking, you know, Indiana Jones always finds a map at some point. Maybe I'll find a map. And I looked at his book and opened it up, and out fell this map. It was one of those kind of old, crinkly maps, just like in the movies. And I looked at it, and he had written down exactly what he thought the Eastern Nile Delta looked like.
Drews hurries back to the office and makes a high-resolution scan of the ancient map. At the time of Herodotus, Lake Manzala is called Lake Tanis. The map provides Drews the data he needs. But before he can run the test, he needs one final piece of information: a potential crossing place on the hundreds of miles of lakeshore. He turns again to the Bible. The text offers some distinct clues about where the Israelites are when the miracle occurs.
You must camp at Pi Hahiroth, across from Baal Zephon, between Migdal and the sea. So you can imagine the author of Exodus saying, I've given them 3 place names. They've got to know. They've got to get one of these. They've got to know where it is. So there's 3 place names. How can you miss it?
And, like Kornuk before him, Carl quickly realizes that the ancient names are of little use. They don't seem to match any modern name.
We say, we don't know. We thank you for 3 place names, but we don't know where those are.
The names don't match anything in the region, at least not today. Could they match a name from the time of Herodotus? Drews studies the ancient map again. Looking closely at the shoreline, he spots a town. It's called Magdalum.
And I looked at that and said, that sounds like Migdal.
If Magdalum on the map is another name for Migdal in the Bible, then the crossing site must be nearby. On his quest to pinpoint the precise location where Moses parted the Red Sea, the focus of software engineer Carl Drews' investigation falls on a tiny peninsula just north of the city of Magdalum.
This is the map that I found in the basement of the Norland Library. You'll see this place called Magdalum. And if Moses is standing right here, then he would truly be between Migdal and the sea, that is the Mediterranean Sea.
It's a place where wind set down just might work. Drews constructs a digital representation of the area called an ocean model.
Here is the Mediterranean Sea. Here is the shallow coastal lagoon called the Lake of Tanis. This area along here is a couple of shallow lagoons which formed along the Pelusiac branch of the Nile. This point here is where Moses and the Israelites were trapped. Water on three sides and the chariots facing them from the west. They're stuck here. Something could happen there where the wind would blow from the east, the water would slide away from the wind direction and part. So Moses and the Israelites escape across here. When the wind stops blowing, these bodies of water come back together again with this huge surge, and they drown anybody who's left in the crossing. And I said, what about that? Perhaps that would work.
It's a huge boost for his theory.
So things were clicking in a number of ways, and you really feel excited, like this, yes, I've got it, and I think I'm right this time.
Now all Drews has to do is prove it. After months of work, he is ready to put his theory to the ultimate test. He must run his ocean model on the university supercomputer. It's a nerve-wracking moment.
You are supposed to report negative results as well as positive results, but somehow there was this idea that if I don't get Moses across, I'm not going to graduate. So these ideas go through your mind late at night when you're trying to make these things work.
Drews runs his model. The first attempts do not work. It's a frustrating time for the young scientist.
At times like that, the best thing was having Christian faith.
Bob Cornuke also has faith. He too knows about the translation of Yam Suf, a sea of reeds. But he puts no credence in a theory like Carl Drews of a lake crossing. He believes the Bible is clear enough. It must be a sea, not a lake.
I would have to say that people have got it wrong on the Sea of Reeds and all that. The Bible says that the Egyptians sunk like stones in a mighty sea, in the depth of a deep sea.
In 1988, Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams traveled to London to pursue their own Red Sea quest. Archaeologists say it's pointless, but Bob is determined to continue his investigation of the crossing point at the Straits of Tiran. To find proof, he must get across the Gulf of Aqaba and into Saudi Arabia. Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams grab their visas. Within days, they are on their way to the location where they hope Moses parted the Red Sea. Bob Cornuke and Larry Williams' quest to find the location where Moses parted the Red Sea has brought them to Saudi Arabia. The two friends fly to Tabuk and then drive toward the coast. They believe that the parting of the Red Sea happened at the Straits of Tiran. If they are correct, then two key stopping points mentioned in the Exodus of the Israelites must be on the Saudi side of the Gulf. The first is the bitter waters of Marah.
Marah is a word that simply means bitter, and what happens there, Moses performs a miracle by throwing a staff into the water that turns it from being bitter to being sweet and drinkable.
The second location is the 12 Springs of Elim.
It is presented as an oasis with 70 palm trees and 12 springs.
Will they be able to find the bitter waters and the 12 springs?
I have that Bible out, and it says they took a 3-day journey to the bitter springs of Marah. So we set our odometer and said tomorrow we're going to go about 30 to 40 kilometers. Right in there, that's where we should find the bitter springs of Marah.
Cornuke and Williams drive across the barren landscape. "20 miles later, they discover an area of springs. To test it, they taste the water.
It was so bitter, the bitter taste lingered for 2 days. It was just a horrible, it just kind of like almost burned our tongues. It was definitely bitter. So we think that could possibly be the bitter springs of Marah.
Cornuke believes he has found the first piece of evidence that the Israelites did cross into Saudi Arabia at the Straits of Tiran. Now, he and Williams must find the other: the 70 palms and 12 springs of Elim. They continue their drive along what they believe is the route of the Exodus. Their excitement mounts as they see ahead of them an oasis in the wilderness.
We have these big palm trees everywhere, and the thing was just beautiful there.
They discover that there are, indeed, springs in the grove. This time, the water is fresh and clean. It's the discovery they were hoping for.
This palm grove has 12 springs in it. 12 springs, not 11, not 10, not exactly as the Bible says, the 12 springs of Elim.
Bob Cornuke feels the evidence is beginning to stack up. To clinch it, he believes he needs just one last piece of proof. While he didn't find any remains of the chariot army on the Egyptian side of the Gulf, perhaps he will on the Saudi side.
I charted the drift of if these soldiers would have bloated and they would have floated to shore, where would their bodies have settled? And could their bodies have just left little pieces of metal that could survive?
Bob feels he is coming very close to proving beyond a doubt his theory that the crossing happened at the Straits of Tiran. Back in Colorado, the pressure is on for computer scientist Carl Drews. He believes that the crossing happened far to the north of the Straits of Tiran, at the edge of Lake Manzala in the eastern Nile Delta. To prove his theory is possible, he must get his computer model to show that an east wind can part this body of water as it was 3,000 years ago. After many setbacks, he is ready to run his test using a powerful supercomputer. With his heart in his mouth, he presses the return key to start the model. He watches as the giant computer crunches the numbers. Every 6 minutes, the model updates, gradually plotting the movement of the water. It's so complicated, even a supercomputer will take hours to run the entire test.
But at some point it occurred to me, be like Moses. Moses had to wait in faith. I need to wait. This is my Moses moment.
The computer model will take all night, so Drews heads home full of anticipation. In the morning, he checks the completed test to see if his hard work has paid off.
I zoomed forward in the model and yes, it worked.
To software engineer Carl Drews, the results of his ocean model testing are conclusive.
We have blue, which is water, green, which is low-lying land, and red, which is higher land. You'll see a brown area growing here on this side. That's the land bridge there. After 9 hours, it connects. This is kilometers wide, so there's plenty of room for as many Israelites as you want to cross. Until 12 o'clock, 12 hours into the simulation, when the wind stops, the water is going to come back in from both directions. So if anybody is left here, they have just minutes to escape. The land bridge closes, and the game is over. This is the end of Pharaoh's army if they are the ones trapped in that gap.
Drews believes his model shows that the Red Sea crossing could happen just as the Bible says, at the eastern edge of Lake Manzala. Kornuk believes the lake theory is wrong. He's sure it happened instead at the Straits of Tiran. But to bolster his theory, Kornuk needs to find evidence of chariot remains along the shores. He contacts friends who have permission to travel in Saudi Arabia. Kornuk asks them to look for further clues in the sandstone ridges along the beach on the Saudi side of the Straits of Tiran. Bob is astounded by what they discover.
Sure enough, they found little pieces of ancient bronze. This object was found on the Arabian side. We believe that this area was underwater at one time. About 3,500 years ago, it surely would have been the shoreline where there was water. Now the water's receded about 20, 30 feet. And so this was harvested there where the Egyptian army would have floated and gone to shore. And so coral grows that possibly grew over this remnant, and it preserved it for all these years. So this could be an artifact from the Exodus. I believe with strong, strong conviction in my heart that the Straits of Tiran is the actual place where the Red Sea split in two and the children of Israel went through and the entire Egyptian army was drowned. This is evidence, this is God's fingerprints left on this planet for us to know that he was here then, he's here now, and he has a destiny for us in the future.
Professional archaeologists insist that finding the location of the Red Sea parting is futile. But amateurs Carl Drews and Bob Kornuk each believe they have solved the mystery. If, as the Bible says, God has left his fingerprints on the earth, it will not be long before the truth is revealed.